Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be doing the To Boldly Go book tag, which is a Star Trek themed book tag put together by Ariel from She Wants the Diction. I have not seen all of Star Trek, but it does hold a very special place in my heart. My granddad was a really huge Trekkie, and so a lot of the episodes that I've seen are a lot of the older ones, because it's the stuff that he would watch. I don't think it's something that I'm going to be watching anytime soon, because I'll probably sob through it because of that, but it still has a very special place for me, and this was a good tag with good questions, so I'm going to be doing this today. The first prompt is, Live Long and Prosper, a book that benefited your well-being. And I'm going to be talking about the Enneagram. I've got a couple of books because the book that I started with helped me, but I think that other ones might be better to start with or might be better for some people. So, the book that I read first was The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery. And this has a pretty good layout of the Enneagram and some bits and pieces of it. There are sections that are more religion-oriented, but they are, I think, applicable outside of Christianity for the most part as well. And they're really easy to skip over. It's not like inside all of the text. It's just kind of a section at the end of each chapter. So I think that this would be good for some people, just depending on how you feel about the religious tilt to it. However, the most recent book that I read on the topic was The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Don Richard Russo and Russ Hudson. And I think this is probably a better starting point. It goes into more detail and talks about, like, the origins of the Enneagram, and it also talks more complexly about how all the numbers are related. They go into that a little bit in this, but they go into it in more detail in here. I also read the Beatrice Chestnut book on the Enneagram, which I really enjoyed, but is probably intense for a beginner. Regardless of which book, the Enneagram was super helpful to me. My most recent therapist used the Enneagram, and that framework has helped me a lot in realizing where my brain tends to go when things get bad. It's made me feel more seen. I'm an Enneagram 9, and a lot of the deep description, especially in the Beatrice Chestnut book, goes into kind of the 9's tendency to dissociate, and that made me see super seen because I've had bad experiences in the past with therapists who I, like, described dissociation to, and they just gave me a sad look. It's like, that doesn't make me feel completely fucked up. That was really important. And then another really big thing to realize was that when I start to get bad, like anxious or depressed or different things like that, I have a tendency to rationalize stuff like emotions, which cannot be rationalized. That's not how the world works. And acknowledging that has been super helpful because I can see myself when I'm like, well, I shouldn't be sad because of X, Y, or Z. And I start to really, like, try to objectively hyperanalyze myself. That was a long way to say these books is the answer to the question. Starting off great with a giant rambling session. The next question, He's Dead, Jim, the last book you DNF'd. That would be The Brave by James Bird. I was listening to it on audiobook in kind of a slump, but also there were some kind of plot holes. There was miscommunication that was just a little bit much, even for a middle grade. And the way that they talked about Indigenous people felt a little bit fetishy. I go into a little bit more detail in my wrap-up if you're interested. So I'll link that as well as some reviews from Indigenous authors. So that was my last DNF. The next prompt is Mind Meld, a book that messed with your head. And the first thing that came to my mind is a book that I actually read several years ago, so I don't I do remember some of the details really well, but I don't remember, like, all of it, and I do want to reread it. And that is Dream Boy by Jim Grimsley. I went into this, and I was expecting, like, some love, maybe a little bit of sad. I don't think I had too many expectations, but this was a wild fucking ride. Like, all the stuff that happens in the last, like, I want to say 2 chapters? I forget how long the chapters are. But, like, the last bit is just bizarre. It just gets super weird, and I was not expecting it. I came away from the book not really knowing if I'd wasted my time or if it was excellent. It felt like I'd gotten off of a roller coaster, and I'm still not sure what happened or what it means. But I want to reread it to try to figure it out a little bit more. So I guess it's positive. Next we have Captain's Log, a book written in epistolary format. So a book written in letters. For this, I have a classic. Again, it's one that I read a few years ago, but I've read it several times. And that is Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. You probably know what Perks of Being a Wallflower is if you have not been living under a rock the past decade. It is the story of Charlie. This book is written to letters to someone. You never know who. It's like a kind of acquaintance that he doesn't even really know. And it basically details his first year of high school, finding kind of older friends, and while he's also grieving the loss of his best friend from middle school and processing some childhood trauma. So definitely check the trigger warnings. I love Charlie with my whole heart and relate to him too much. So this is the book that I pick. Next, we have Replicator, a book that reminds you of another book. And I've got this, but I've got it in like 3 levels. So I don't just have 2, I have 3. To start off with, I have the book Nevada by Imogen and Binnie, which I think I've talked about in probably my past 2 videos. I've talked about all 3 of these in recent videos, but you know what? It's my channel, and I'm excited about these books. So Nevada is about a trans girl in New York. She's just been dumped by her girlfriend. She's still processing shit. She doesn't really know herself, so it's like it's kind of like a late 20s, early 30s coming of age story. And I think that this kind of later coming of age is really important, I think, in general. You know, a lot of people in early adulthood are still getting their feet, finding their footing in kind of a different way than teenagers, but especially queer people. I think that there's something unique about our experience, especially since a lot of us didn't get to have adolescence in the same way, or at least not totally as ourselves. I'm getting away from it all. So this is very much focused on the main character, who is just a fucking mess. You definitely see her flaws throughout this whole thing. So all of that with her character initially made me think of Catcher in the Rye by DJ Salinger, which is kind of the quintessential angsty teenage coming of age classic. Very polarizing. A lot of people don't like Catcher in the Rye. I really loved it. I read it as an adult. I can't even say, oh, well, I read it as a kid and I connect. It's like, no, I read it as an adult and I recognized how messy he was and the kind of issues that he was dealing with. Because a lot of people are like, oh, well, he's just some annoying teenager. But he's really going through it. Like, his, I think, sibling died. He's got a creepy teacher. He just got kicked out of school. Like, give him some slack. He's gonna be insufferable. He's a teenage boy. Like, no offense to any teenage boys watching this. I feel like there are probably not any. But these made me think of each other. But also, the book Detransition, baby, made me think of Nevada. Messy as hell, trans woman, who are, this one they're a little bit older. I think they're more solidly in their 30s. And it's not quite the same coming of age as this, but I would argue that Ames is doing a lot of figuring out. But these super messy trans girls, literary fiction, I would honestly say if Detransition Baby and Catcher in the Rye had a baby and there was some grandparent that had a more stream of consciousness they could pass like a recessive gene on, it would be Nevada. There's my long convoluted answer to that. Next we have Tricorder, a book with multiple perspectives. And for this, I have 2 books. But they're both by the same author, David Levithan. It's been a while since I've read any David Levithan. I want to say the last book that I read of his was Two Boys Kissing. I think I read it in about 2015. And then I read this probably around 2012. These are both written in multiple perspectives. Realm of Possibilities is poems, and each poem is written from a different person's perspective. I've honestly forgotten the event that happens. I feel like there's a big event that they're all kind of meditating on, but I know for sure that they're all thinking about different things. And I think is bookended. Could be wrong, again. It's been like a decade since I've read it. Bookended by 2 characters who are boys that like each other or are dating. David Levithan was the first gay YA author that I ever read. I think probably the first Own Voices queer fiction. So there was that. I remember really loving this. And then Two Boys Kissing goes back and forth between several stories of gay boys. This is technically all written from the perspective of gay men who have died, a lot of them from the AIDS epidemic. So it's kind of sort of multiple perspectives. It's definitely multiple stories, and within each story you get a certain person's perspective. And each of these people are in different stages of life and love. They're all teenage boys, but there are some people who have broken up and are dealing with that, some people who are solidly in a relationship, some people who just started a relationship, and someone who is very lonely. So you kind of get the whole gamut. And I remember really loving this. So, David Levithan. The next prompt is Time Warp, a book from your past. And from that, I'm going to go with The Guardians of Ga'Hoole by Kathryn Laskey. This book is set in a world where, like, all of the characters are owls. Our main character falls out of the nest and then gets scooped up by some people who take him to a boarding school. And this boarding school is super weird. People are getting brainwashed. Main character Soren is like, I don't know what's going on, but this is really bizarre. Teams up with somebody. They try to escape and figure out what's really going on at this school. This is a series. I don't think that I ever finished it, but I definitely got a few books in, and you can see the condition of this copy. I definitely read the hell out of it. I had phases as a child of focusing on different animals. Horses were really big at some point. Dogs were huge. I think my biggest obsession was dogs. I would, like, when I had computer time, in the days when we had, like, computer rooms and whatever, I would spend it looking at dog breed websites and, like, looking at the different types of dogs and, like, memorizing stuff about them. But in another phase, I really focused on owls and tried really hard to draw owls. And my favorites were barn owls because Soren was a barn owl. So, it's really good stuff. Next we have Communicator, a book someone recommended to you, plus a book you would recommend to them. These are going to be to and from my friend Nelson. We talk about books a lot, and we both have kind of varied tastes in books. The book that they recommended me was Bloom. I have not read it yet, but I am in the process of starting to read it. It's on my TBR, and it's one that I'm going to get to soon. And the book that I recommended to them was On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. I actually just recommended them Tillie Walden like as a blanket thing, and they have already read Are You Listening? They just got done reading it, and they are in the middle of On a Sunbeam. I am so stoked. This is such an excellent book. Both of these are queer graphic novels, and the covers look so nice together. I'm obsessed. Bloom is very summery, and it focuses on a romance between these two boys. One of them works at a bakery. I'm sure it's going to be super cute. And then On a Sunbeam is a fantasy. All of the characters are gay. There is not a man to be seen in this. There is one non-binary character. And there's kind of a dual timeline going on. The main character is currently working with a group of people who basically fix up old places around space. So that's one timeline. And then the other timeline is when she was in school with her kind of girlfriend. And at some point, the timelines converge. The next prompt is Orion Slave Girl, a book with problematic elements. And, oh, I had one book for this, but a better book just came to mind. The book that I was going to say initially was Before Stonewall, Activists for Gay and Lesbian Rights in Historical Context by Vern Bollow. I will say there is good stuff in this. There are a lot of important figures that you can look at, but it is very white. Very white. And in particular, one that jumped out at me as like a little bit like, ooh, was the section on Henry Gerber. And Henry Gerber is one of the founders of the very first gay, officially recognized gay organization in the U.S., the Society for Human Rights, founded in 1924. There's the dude. I forget which position that he held within the group, but he was one of the founders. And it's been a while since I've looked at this. This was one of the first history books that I was looking at, really trying to find stuff in relation to my thesis. But two kind of problematic elements. One is the biphobia. One of the people who was a part of the group had a wife. And that's kind of the reason why they got found out, because he told his wife and the police came and it was a whole thing and they got shut down. But initially nobody was supposed, from my understanding, if I'm remembering correctly, they initially didn't want people who had wives to be in there. Or basically bisexual people. I don't think that that's the word that they used. And he was super salty towards that dude. On one hand, I understand because, like, that's why they got caught. But on the other hand, oof. And the other issue is one of the big people that gets left out of the conversation about the Society for Human Rights. And that is John T. Graves, who was a black clergyman and the president of the Society for Human Rights. It's, you go down the Google rabbit hole and see how little information there is on this man. So that is clearly a problem. But there has been, a fair amount about Henry Gerber. I think he has his own Wikipedia page, which is more than can be said for a lot of the other people who were involved. And there are quotes from Henry Gerber in here. This turned into me just talking about the Society for Human Rights. Nobody asked about this. So, problematic book. It's white as hell. Problematic man. Henry Gerber. Biphobe and doesn't give credit to the black man that was the president of his organization. But the book that I thought of this time that I read the prompt was Rubyfruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. And I see people recommend this, which is understandable because it's like a lesbian classic. There is good stuff in here. It is a good, interesting story. There are interesting things about the writing. However, people never talk about the really bizarre transphobia near the end. Spoiler warning, I guess. I'll put a I'll put a timestamp somewhere. But there's this scene, it's been a few years since I've read it, but she's going to hook up with, or maybe just visit, and then it turns into like a hookup, this girl, but I forget what exactly happens, but the people end up being trans. I use that loosely, more like the misunderstood idea of the transvestite, literally that like psychological model, and paraphilia. It was a big fucking mess, and it was super weird. Like, it felt wholly unnecessary. I don't even know. That's problematic as fuck, and people just recommend it. Oh, look, it's a lesbian classic, and it is a lesbian classic. It's worth being read, but like, you need to talk about that shit, because if a trans person picked this up in the wrong mindset, that would just be very triggering. So, bizarre transphobia in Rubyfruit Jungle. The final prompt is Kobayashi Maru, an extremely challenging book. And for this, I have a quintessential, super dense academic work, Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. Judith Butler is really well known for having a dense, very dense, kind of convoluted writing style. I technically read this book. I read enough of this book. I would like to go through and read the whole thing again. This is something that they wrote in the 1980s. It's actually one of kind of the foundational trans, like gender studies texts, and talks about the performativity of gender, which is not necessarily the same thing as saying we just perform gender. Performativity is more than that. A lot of people get that confused, understandably, because not everybody can crack into this text. I did kind of go through and try to get a feel of each of the chapters, particularly since I read this for a class. Got a good grade on the annotated bibliography. It really does have some valuable stuff. I think that the idea of kind of only modeling a lot of stuff off of drag queens gets a little bit dicey. But it's an important foundational text. I actually want to get into more Judith Butler's stuff, just because they are so important kind of in the field of sexuality and gender studies and queer theory. I would like to read, they did a follow-up to Gender Trouble that I can't think of the title of, so it'll be on the screen. And I would like to be able to get into that. That is all for the To Boldly Go book tag. Thank you so much, Ariel, for putting this together. I will tag a few people. I should probably double check who she tagged and who's done this. I'm definitely going to tag Kathy, because I remember her talking about Star Trek at some point. I'm going to tag Lukash from A Cruel Reader's Thesis. I know that they do a lot of tags. And then I'll tag Andrea from Penguin Reads. I think that's their channel name. And I also think that's how you pronounce it. I'm realizing that it might not actually say penguins, and that's why I've been reading it in my head this whole time. But, you know, that's fine. I can read, but that doesn't mean that I can pronounce things or talk. So, 3 people is good. And anyone else who's interested in Star Trek for any sort of reason, do this. Definitely check out Ariel's original video. Yeah. And let me know about any thoughts on any of the books that I've mentioned. Thank you all so much for watching.